The morning of October 10th, 1944, in the dense Ardennes forests of Belgium, a chill clung to the branches, and the ground was littered with the remnants of shattered winter shells. German infantrymen of the 116th Panzer Division crouched behind sodden tree trunks and rubble-strewn roads, their Kar 9 8K rifles held tight, waiting for the first sign of American movement. Lieutenant Hans Keller checked his watch, the cold metal biting into his fingers. The orders were clear: hold the line, keep the American forces from breaking through the forested bottleneck. Across the clearing, barely 100 meters distant, a single American squad advanced. Their movement was methodical but unnervingly confident. Unlike the Germans, whose doctrine emphasized careful, disciplined volleys under the command of an NCO or officer, these infantrymen moved with a rhythm that seemed almost mechanical, yet terrifyingly fluid. The source of their confidence became apparent in the next: heartbeat. The M1 Garand rifles slung across their shoulders spat rounds in rapid succession, one after another, in what the Americans called walking fire. Each trigger released bullets at a tempo no bolt-action soldier could match. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For Lieutenant Keller, the first wave was a shock. He had trained his men for months on suppressing enemy movement with MG-42 machine guns, trusting in the roar and rhythm of their 125 rounds per minute firepower. But now, even as his men manned their positions, bullets ricocheted off trunks and shattered dirt clods in a manner that made the forest floor itself seem alive with the enemy's fire. Reports from veterans of the engagement would later describe this moment as one of profound disbelief, the first tangible evidence that American infantry tactics and weaponry had rewritten the rules of engagement. The irony was stark. German military doctrine, developed over decades, was rooted in precision, discipline, and fire control. Each soldier was trained to hold his fire until given the command, to make every shot count, and to rely on synchronized suppressive fire from machine guns rather than the initiative of individual riflemen. Manuals drilled this lesson relentlessly. The Kar 9 8K was accurate, dependable, and lethal, but its bolt-action mechanism, requiring the shooter to lift, pull back, push forward, and lock after every shot, fundamentally limited the rate of fire. A well-trained soldier might manage 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute. By contrast, an American armed with an M1 Garand could release 40 to 50 accurate rounds in the same time span. The German infantry had long assumed this disparity was theoretical rather than practical. They had encountered American rifles in Europe before, but never in such a concentrated, systematically aggressive application. The soldiers had been taught to respect American firepower, but to dismiss the idea that individual riflemen could suppress an MG-42 nest without traditional machine gun support. In the weeks and months prior, propaganda had reinforced this belief. Leaflets dropped by the Luftwaffe emphasized the technical superiority of German weapons, celebrating the MG-42's 60% faster rate of fire compared to earlier models and portraying the American infantry as reliant on quantity over quality. Veteran memoirs recount how these narratives were internalized. German soldiers genuinely believed their own arms could dominate the battlefield, that discipline and fire control were decisive, and that the M1 Garand, impressive as it was, could not match the suppressive capabilities of an entrenched MG-42 team. Yet, as the first American rifleman unleashed his walking fire across the frozen underbrush, the reality struck immediately. The MG-42, while devastating in design, required line of sight and proper crew coordination. Even a well-drilled team could not adjust fast enough to account for multiple targets advancing with the rhythm of semi-automatic fire. Rounds from the Garand forced machine gun teams to duck, relocate, or risk casualties, something no German soldier had anticipated. This moment, an instantaneous collision between doctrine and reality, would ripple through the Ardennes and beyond. Small squads, armed with semi-automatic rifles, began demonstrating that individual initiative, backed by superior rate of fire, could neutralize positions that had once been considered impregnable. For the German infantry, the lesson was stark. The battlefield had shifted, and technology, mass production, and tactical adaptation were overturning the carefully constructed mental models they had carried for years. To understand how such a tactical revelation could occur, it is essential to trace both the material and psychological foundations of German infantry confidence. The Kar-98K, adopted officially in 1935, was the product of a long tradition of German rifle engineering. Its Mauser action was simple, robust, and remarkably accurate at ranges up to 600 meters. German training manuals emphasized controlled breathing, sight alignment, and deliberate shot placement. Soldiers were instructed to fire only when they had a clear target, and to coordinate volleys across squads to maintain suppressive fire. By contrast, the United States had taken a very different path. The M1 Garand, designed by John Garand and adopted in 1936, was the first semi-automatic rifle to be issued widely to infantry. Unlike the Kar-98K, it allowed the shooter to maintain continuous fire, retain sight picture, and reacquire targets almost instantaneously. Each Garand could hold 8 rounds in an en-bloc clip and be reloaded in under 3 seconds, a seemingly minor technical detail with monumental battlefield implications. Production figures illustrate the industrial scale behind this advantage. By 1943, American factories were producing over 1,000 rifles per day at Springfield Armory, ensuring nearly all frontline infantry carried the weapon, while Germany's semi-automatic rifles, like the G-41 or G-43, remained scarce and plagued by mechanical unreliability. Psychologically, this disparity created an invisible advantage long before bullets were fired. Soldiers carrying the Garand reported increased confidence and aggression, knowing they could suppress enemy positions while advancing. Conversely, German troops encountering this new tempo were initially paralyzed by disbelief, unsure whether they faced a small unit or a concentrated machine gun position. The rules of engagement they had internalized, bolt-action rhythm, machine gun reliance, and squad-coordinated suppression, were suddenly insufficient. Even in instances where MG-42 teams were operational, the presence of walking fire disrupted their timing. Suppression was no longer purely a matter of placing rounds on target. It became a battle of reaction speed, with American infantry dictating the tempo of combat. Soldiers had to react not to a single volume of fire, but to a cascade of aimed shots, forcing them to break cover repeatedly, reposition under duress, and ultimately yield tactical ground they had been trained to hold. By the end of that first encounter in October, the psychological shift was undeniable. Veteran accounts note the muttering among officers. They fight like machine gunners, but with rifles in hand. Reports filtered up the chain, prompting revisions to tactical doctrine in real time. Some German companies attempted to adjust by spreading their MG-42 seconds more thinly, embedding multiple fire teams to cover flanks, and ordering counterattacks timed against the perceived limits of Garand ammunition. Yet, the semi-automatic advantage could not be fully neutralized without sacrificing their doctrinal principles of concentrated, disciplined fire. The first engagement in the Ardennes thus became emblematic of a larger historical irony. The Germans had invested decades in producing technically perfect, reliable rifles, training their men to be methodical marksmen and instilling confidence in established doctrine. Yet, the Americans, with their foresight in semi-automatic technology and mass production, created a situation where individual initiative, combined with mechanical advantage, subverted entrenched military culture. One infantry squad could suppress positions previously deemed formidable, forcing a re-evaluation of what constituted tactical dominance on the World War II battlefield. As the frost-laden morning deepened into midday, the German soldiers found themselves confronting a reality their training had never prepared them for. Private Dieter Schumann, a rifleman with the 116th Panzer Division, later recounted in his memoirs how the American squads seemed to move as if the forest itself obeyed their rhythm. Every time he took aim with his Kar 98K, a sharp ping echoed through the trees, one of those distinctive Garand block clips ejecting, followed immediately by another round, slamming into the undergrowth. There was no pause, no ritual of working the bolt, just a continuous stream of suppressive fire advancing toward them. To understand why this was so disorienting, one must examine the mechanics of the weapons themselves. The Kar 98K, adopted in 1935, featured a 5-round internal magazine fed by stripper clips. The bolt-action system required the soldier to lift the bolt handle, pull it fully rearward to eject the spent casing, push it forward to chamber a new round, and rotate the handle down to lock the action. Even under ideal conditions, a trained marksman could fire only 15 to 20 rounds per minute with accuracy. In contrast, the M1 Garand, designed by John Garand and adopted in 1936, utilized a gas-operated rotating bolt system. A portion of the propellant gas drove an operating rod that automatically ejected the spent casing and chambered the next round. With 8 rounds in its unblock clip and a well-practiced soldier, the rate of aimed fire could reach 40 to 50 rounds per minute, more than double the Kar 98K, without breaking the shooter's sight picture or firing rhythm. This difference was not merely technical, it reshaped battlefield psychology. German soldiers, trained to calculate intervals between fire, to coordinate with machine guns, and to maintain composure under the rhythm of controlled volleys, suddenly faced an enemy who ignored their pacing entirely. The semi-automatic rate of fire of the Garand created the perception of multiple targets advancing simultaneously, often leading German riflemen to overestimate the enemy's numbers or the presence of unseen machine guns. The terrain of the Ardennes amplified this effect. Narrow roads, dense thickets, and undulating ridges favored defensive tactics, where machine gun nests like the MG-42 were placed to create lethal crossfires. The MG-42, firing up to 1,250 rounds per minute, was a formidable weapon, but it required trained crews to maintain effective fields of fire. A single MG-42 team could dominate a choke point, but its effectiveness relied on the predictability of enemy movement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Walking fire disrupted that predictability. American squads advanced in short bursts, using cover intelligently, while firing continuously from the hip or low kneeling positions. Each M1 Garand round forced German soldiers to adjust, take cover, or risk immediate casualties, breaking the cohesion of MG-42 fields of fire. German NCOs noted that even a single American squad could temporarily neutralize positions designed for double or triple their numbers. In one engagement, near Haufelais, for instance, a platoon of Americans armed exclusively with M1 Garands approached an MG-42 nest covering a forest road. The German team, confident in the lethality of their machine gun, was unprepared for suppressive fire from individual rifles. Private Karl Richter later recalled, "We were trained to believe a rifle was harmless in comparison to the MG-42. But the Garand soldiers didn't stop. They walked forward, firing as if the forest was theirs, and our machine gun had to stop to avoid being overrun. In under 5 minutes, the Americans had crossed a distance of roughly 70 meters, forcing the Germans to retreat or risk annihilation. This incident highlights a critical intersection of technology, industrial capacity, and doctrine. While Germany had developed advanced firearms, including the G41 and G43 semi-automatic rifles, production constraints and mechanical unreliability prevented mass adoption. By contrast, American factories produced over 5.4 million M1 Garands by 1945, with Springfield Armory alone reaching a peak output of 1,000 rifles per day in January 1944. The sheer volume of semi-automatic rifles in American hands created a systemic advantage. Any tactical innovation, such as walking fire, could be deployed across multiple squads and engagements without the risk of unit-level shortage. German officers, steeped in doctrine from the Kriegsschule system, were initially dismissive of anecdotal reports. They assumed isolated incidents could be explained by poorly aimed American fire or the intervention of machine guns disguised as rifles. Field reports, however, were increasingly consistent. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann, writing in March 1945, noted that M1 Garand squads had forced multiple MG-42 positions to relocate simultaneously, a feat that would have required coordinated platoon maneuvers under traditional doctrine. The impact on morale was profound. German infantry, conditioned to rely on disciplined fire control and superior training, began to experience cognitive dissonance in the presence of continuous semi-automatic fire. Veterans described the sensation as facing an enemy who could shoot faster than our brains could calculate, emphasizing the psychological weight of suppressive fire delivered by a single rifleman. Even experienced commanders noted that the tempo of the battlefield had shifted. Engagements were no longer dictated solely by artillery or machine guns, but increasingly by the initiative and firepower of individual American soldiers. Walking fire also revealed a broader industrial and logistical disparity. While the M1 Garand was robust, easily maintained in the field, and compatible with mass-produced ammunition, German semi-automatic rifles suffered from overcomplicated mechanisms and fragile parts. The G-41, for instance, used a direct gas system prone to jamming under battlefield conditions, while the G-43 required careful cleaning to remain functional. The result was that bolt-action rifles remained the standard for German infantry, creating a structural vulnerability. Soldiers could not respond to continuous suppressive fire without significant pauses for reloading. American training reinforced this advantage. Infantrymen were instructed to advance while firing, coordinating movements in small teams to maintain constant pressure. Recruits learned to switch between aimed shots and controlled walking fire, maximizing both accuracy and suppressive effect. The 8-round en-bloc clip, combined with a rapid reload technique, meant that squads could sustain continuous fire for minutes at a time, something the German doctrine considered impossible without machine guns. By late December 1944, the cumulative effect of these engagements forced German High Command to adjust its doctrine in real time. In the Ardennes, General Hasso von Manteuffel reported that enemy riflemen advance with the certainty of machine gunners, yet wield no heavy weapons. Recommendations included dispersing MG-42 teams more widely, increasing use of observation posts, and integrating small arms fire into suppressive strategies. Yet these were reactive measures, constrained by the fundamental mismatch between bolt-action rate of fire and semi-automatic walking fire. The paradox was both tactical and psychological. German infantry had been trained to trust their weapons, their formations, and their doctrine. The Americans, leveraging foresight in weapon design and mass production, demonstrated that individual initiative supported by semi-automatic rifles could override entrenched tactical assumptions. In essence, the Germans faced a technological disruption they had neither anticipated nor prepared for, a disruption that required adaptation under fire, often at severe human cost. Field accounts repeatedly highlight this irony. Lieutenant Keller's journal entry from October 11, 1944 reads, "Our machine guns, prepared for months, could not dictate the forest. Riflemen advance like swarms, yet each shot is deliberate, precise, and unending. We are witnessing a new rhythm of battle, one we cannot match with training alone." Similar sentiments appear in post-war analyses, emphasizing how walking fire changed small unit engagements in ways that would influence Allied and Axis tactics for the remainder of the conflict. Industrial context further underscores the disparity. By 1944, German arms production faced severe shortages of quality steel, reliable machining, and replacement parts. While early G-41 models incorporated innovative gas-operated systems, by late war, simplified production and field-expedient modifications degraded performance. Conversely, the American M1 Garand benefited from standardized production, rigorous quality control, and ample supply of 30-06 Springfield ammunition. Soldiers could rely on functioning weapons and uninterrupted firepower, a luxury German soldiers increasingly lacked. Walking fire also revealed a subtle psychological leverage beyond sheer rate of fire. By continuously advancing while firing, American squads denied German troops the ability to estimate enemy strength accurately, undermining confidence in their positions. The MG-42 nest, once a symbol of battlefield dominance, became a temporary obstacle rather than an unassailable defense. Multiple German memoirs attest to the disorienting effect. Infantrymen reported a sense of being overwhelmed not by numbers, but by tempo and initiative, a phenomenon rarely accounted for in training manuals. In one illustrative encounter, a German squad attempted a counter-ambush along a ridge near Saint-Vith. Their MG-42 teams were positioned to cover the valley below, but American riflemen, advancing with walking fire, systematically suppressed each team in rapid succession. The German squad was forced to retreat under fire, suffering casualties disproportionate to the size of the attacking force. Here, the material advantage of semi-automatic rifles intersected with tactical innovation, demonstrating that a relatively small, disciplined unit could achieve effects previously reserved for machine guns. The broader implication was clear. The traditional metrics of combat effectiveness, weapon caliber, machine gun placement, and disciplined fire control were no longer sufficient indicators of battlefield dominance. In the Ardennes, initiative, industrial foresight, and the semi-automatic rifle combined to create an asymmetric advantage that fundamentally altered the conduct of infantry engagements. German commanders faced the stark reality that their training, grounded in decades of proven doctrine, had been rendered partially obsolete by a single technological and tactical innovation. The Ardennes winter of 1944 left scars beyond the frost-bitten terrain and shattered villages. For the German infantry, the encounters with American squads wielding M1 Garands forced a profound reassessment of what they had long taken for granted. Lieutenant Hans Keller, who had survived multiple engagements, later wrote in his post-war memoirs that the psychological impact of walking fire lasted far longer than the physical casualties. Soldiers carried with them the realization that even carefully fortified positions could be neutralized by determined riflemen, undermining confidence in their weapons and doctrine. Casualty reports from the period reflect this unsettling trend. In units of the 116th Panzer Division and adjacent Volksgrenadier formations, small skirmishes against advancing Garand-equipped squads often resulted in disproportionate losses relative to engagement size. Where previously an MG-42 position might suppress entire American companies with few losses. Now a squad of 8 to 10 Americans could force multiple machine gun teams to retreat, sustaining minimal casualties themselves. German officers quickly recognized that this was not an isolated phenomenon, but the consequence of an industrial and tactical imbalance. Industrial foresight played a key role. The M1 Garand, adopted in 1936, was already in widespread distribution by the time American forces crossed the Atlantic in force. By contrast, Germany had limited its semi-automatic production to the G-41 and later the G-43, both of which were mechanically temperamental, especially in harsh winter conditions. The G-41 had suffered from a direct gas system prone to jamming, while the G-43, although an improvement, required careful lubrication and cleaning to maintain functionality. German infantry continued to rely primarily on the bolt-action K-98K, which, while accurate, could not match the rate of fire or suppressive effect of the Garand. This disparity extended beyond mechanics. Soldiers' perceptions of the battlefield were altered. Private Dieter Schumann, recalling an engagement near Bastogne, described the dissonance vividly. We aimed, we fired, yet the enemy did not hesitate, did not pause. It was as if each rifleman could be everywhere at once. Our MG-42 seconds roared, yet their rifles closed the distance regardless. We began to question our training, our weapons, even our doctrine. Memoirs such as these illustrate the cumulative psychological weight of encountering continuous semi-automatic fire, which forced German troops to adapt on the fly, often under fire and at the expense of cohesion. In response, German field manuals were quietly revised. By early 1945, notes circulated among command staff suggested increasing MG-42 dispersion, embedding rifle teams within machine gun positions, and reconsidering small unit tactics when facing semi-automatic equipped enemies. Yet these measures were largely reactive. The reality remained that the core discrepancy, individual soldiers able to lay down walking fire, could not be fully mitigated without abandoning bolt-action rifles or retraining entire formations. The human cost was significant. Accounts from German medics and war diaries show that panic and disorientation often preceded casualties. Soldiers entrenched behind hedgerows or in pillboxes would hesitate, unsure whether to hold fire or abandon positions. The American approach of continuous suppressive fire while advancing created a cascading effect. MG-42 teams withdrew to avoid being overrun, squad cohesion fractured, and tactical reserves were committed to plug gaps that had not yet materialized in conventional doctrine. Conversely, the impact on American infantry morale was remarkable. Soldiers trained to exploit walking fire reported increased confidence and aggressive initiative, knowing that their weapons allowed them to suppress enemy positions effectively. In letters home, soldiers described how the ability to advance while firing made the forest ours, illustrating the profound psychological advantage of semi-automatic technology, coupled with adaptable tactics. The en-bloc clip, rapid reload, and gas-operated mechanism allowed for continuous engagement without the rhythm dictated by bolt manipulation, enabling squads to maintain tempo and momentum against positions the Germans had assumed were impregnable. The material and industrial factors that enabled this advantage cannot be overstated. By 1945, American factories had produced over 5 million M1 Garands, with Springfield Armory and Winchester leading output. Training manuals emphasized aggressive use of semi-automatic fire, integrating walking fire into squad-level maneuvers. Each soldier was capable of both precision-aimed shots and suppressive bursts, a combination that leveraged the rifle's mechanical advantages fully. By contrast, German semi-automatic production remained limited and unreliable. The G-41 and G-43 were issued in scattered numbers, often to specialized troops, leaving frontline infantry dependent on bolt-action rifles. The resulting imbalance between doctrine, technology, and production was stark. Historically, these engagements foreshadowed the fundamental shift in small unit infantry warfare. The ability of individual soldiers to suppress positions once reserved for machine guns represented an evolution in the integration of firepower, mobility, and initiative. German doctrine, rooted in interwar traditions, had assumed control over tempo would remain in the hands of disciplined squads and machine gun teams. The Ardennes demonstrated that industrial foresight and semi-automatic fire could overturn those assumptions, producing asymmetric effects even in conventional engagements. The long-term implications extended beyond the battlefield. Post-war analyses, including reports compiled by Allied intelligence, highlighted the Garands' influence on future infantry doctrine. The concept of walking fire informed both U.S. Army infantry training in the Korean War and the design of subsequent semi-automatic and selective fire rifles. German military studies, conducted during the post-war period, emphasized that reliance on bolt-action rifles in a semi-automatic world had contributed materially to battlefield failures, particularly in late 1944 and early 1945. Personal narratives provide additional insight into the human dimension. Lieutenant Keller described how his unit, after repeated exposure to walking fire, adopted a more cautious, reactive posture, breaking with previously ingrained doctrine. Soldiers would delay firing to assess enemy movement, sometimes hesitating too long, which compounded losses. Others noted the moral shock of seeing a single squad neutralize positions that, by all prior calculations, should have required coordinated artillery support. These experiences illustrate that the Garands' influence was as much psychological as mechanical. Even in the final months of the war, encounters with Garand-equipped units continued to highlight this dynamic. During the retreat through Western Germany in March 1945, German forces attempting to delay American advances repeatedly reported being pinned by small squads, delivering continuous semi-automatic fire. Veteran memoirs describe MG-42 teams forced to relocate repeatedly, improvised defensive positions abandoned, and squad cohesion undermined by the pace and pressure of continuous rifle fire. In essence, the semi-automatic rifle had become a force multiplier, enabling limited American squads to achieve effects once considered possible only for larger units. The irony of the situation resonates through history. German infantry, trained to rely on bolt-action precision, machine gun dominance, and disciplined volley fire, were confronted with a technological and tactical reality that subverted decades of doctrine. The M1 Garand, mass-produced, robust, and wielded by soldiers trained to maximize its suppressive potential, redefined the terms of infantry combat. In a single engagement, the perceived hierarchy of weapons and positions was upended. A rifleman could now impose the firepower of a machine gun, altering both immediate outcomes and the conceptual framework of warfare. By the war's end, the legacy of walking fire was firmly established. Reports compiled in the post-war period underscored the importance of semi-automatic weapons in shaping combat outcomes, influencing doctrine, training, and industrial policy for decades. Infantry engagements in the Ardennes became a case study in how technology, production capacity, and tactical innovation could combine to create disproportionate effects on morale, casualty rates, and operational tempo. Reflecting on these events, one sees a profound historical irony. German soldiers, who prided themselves on training, discipline, and superior weaponry, were undone not by an overwhelming force or strategic blunder, but by individual initiative supported by semi-automatic rifles. The material superiority of the Garand, combined with American tactical adaptation, rendered once pristine doctrines partially obsolete and forced soldiers, officers, and eventually the High Command to confront the limits of tradition in modern mechanized warfare. In closing, the Ardennes engagements serve as a compelling lens through which to examine the interplay of technology, doctrine, and psychology in World War II. The story of German infantry confronting walking fire from M1 Garands illustrates that victory on the battlefield depended as much on foresight, production, and innovation as on courage or discipline. A single squad of determined, well-equipped soldiers could neutralize positions designed for machine guns, shift the tempo of combat, and force a re-evaluation of established tactical principles. For the men on the ground, the lesson was unforgettable. The world of infantry warfare had irrevocably changed, and those who failed to adapt, whether due to doctrine, equipment, or industrial limitations, would find themselves facing a firepower they could neither match nor fully anticipate. The M1 Garand, simple yet revolutionary, had done more than fire bullets. It had redefined the expectations and realities of small unit combat, leaving a legacy that would influence infantry strategy for generations to come. The war in the Ardennes had revealed a stark and undeniable truth. German infantry, trained meticulously in doctrine, discipline, and marksmanship, had underestimated the quiet revolution in small arms that the Americans had quietly been preparing for years. The M1 Garand, a rifle born of foresight, innovation, and industrial might, had delivered an unexpected psychological and tactical shock to men who believed that mastery of bolt-action rifles and machine guns ensured battlefield dominance. For soldiers like Private Dieter Schumann and Lieutenant Hans Keller, the experience was deeply personal. They had been trained to trust their weapons, their formations, and the rhythm of disciplined volleys. Yet, facing squads of Americans advancing with walking fire, they encountered something that seemed almost supernatural. Continuous streams of bullets from rifles that should have been ordinary, suppressing MG-42 positions, forcing retreats, and reshaping the battlefield before their eyes. The dissonance was profound. As Schumann later wrote, "We knew the bullets were coming from rifles, but the effect was like facing a machine gun. Our training was inadequate for this rhythm of fire." This phenomenon was not an isolated quirk, but a reflection of broader industrial and tactical disparities. By 1945, American factories had produced over 5 million M1 Garands, and soldiers were trained to exploit both their rate of fire and reliability. In contrast, German semi-automatic rifles were limited, mechanically temperamental, and often issued in insufficient numbers. The Kar 98K, though precise and reliable, could not deliver the continuous suppressive fire necessary to contend with coordinated walking fire. German forces, despite their discipline and courage, were caught in a trap of doctrine and expectation. They faced a weapon that amplified individual initiative and tempo, a principle they had neither anticipated nor had the means to counter effectively. The encounters in the Ardennes highlighted an essential principle of modern warfare. Technology, training, and industrial foresight can redefine the capabilities of ordinary soldiers. A squad of 8 or 10 Americans could neutralize positions that once required entire platoons or machine gun nests, not through superior numbers, but through the tactical leverage of semi-automatic rifles. The M1 Garand transformed the human element of combat. The individual rifleman became not only a marksman but also a suppressive force, capable of dictating tempo and shaping engagements in ways that German doctrine had assumed impossible. The consequences extended beyond the immediate battlefield. German units exposed to walking fire often suffered more than casualties. They suffered erosion of confidence, breakdown of cohesion, and psychological fatigue. Veterans recalled the disorienting effect of being under continuous fire from advancing riflemen who appeared everywhere at once. MG-42 teams, previously considered nearly invincible in defensive positions, were forced to relocate repeatedly, leaving gaps that smaller American units exploited with devastating efficiency. Tactical adaptations were implemented, but they were reactive and incomplete. The underlying disparity rate of fire, industrial capacity, and field reliability remained. Even after the war, the lessons of walking fire endured. American military planners, recognizing the tactical advantages of semi-automatic rifles, incorporated these lessons into infantry doctrine, influencing the design and deployment of weapons in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. German post-war analyses acknowledged the material and psychological impact of the M1 Garand, emphasizing how the combination of technology, production, and innovative tactics had reshaped expectations for small unit combat. It was a vivid illustration of how foresight and preparation could yield disproportionate advantages on the battlefield. Yet, perhaps the most striking legacy is human. The encounters in the Ardennes remind us that warfare is not determined solely by courage, numbers, or traditional training, but by the ability to adapt to innovation, to leverage material advantages, and to confront the unexpected. The German infantry, though trained, disciplined, and often valorous, faced a moment in which the rules of combat had shifted beneath their feet. The M1 Garand was more than a rifle. It was a statement of industrial foresight, tactical innovation, and human ingenuity. In the final analysis, the story of walking fire is a story of irony and revelation. Soldiers on both sides fought and bled, yet it was the combination of mechanical reliability, mass production, and tactical adaptation that determined the difference in these engagements. German soldiers had expected encounters dictated by doctrine, skill, and predictable firepower. Instead, they faced a reality in which the ordinary rifleman, armed with the right technology and training, could command the battlefield in ways that transcended traditional expectations. As the Ardennes winter receded and the final offensives of 1945 drew near, the echoes of these encounters lingered. For American soldiers, walking fire represented confidence, initiative, and the tangible advantage of preparation. For German infantry, it remained a reminder that even the most disciplined troops can be undone when confronted by foresight, innovation, and relentless adaptation. The M1 Garand had done more than fire bullets. It had redefined the parameters of small unit combat and left a permanent mark on the psychology, doctrine, and technology of modern warfare. In the quiet aftermath, as the smoke cleared and survivors counted the cost, one fact became undeniable. The battlefield had changed, and the lesson was clear. Courage alone was not enough. Discipline alone was insufficient. Victory, even in infantry combat, required the foresight to innovate, the industrial capacity to equip, and the tactical insight to exploit every advantage. And in this convergence of human ingenuity and mechanical design, the M1 Garand had spoken with unmistakable clarity. The rules of engagement were no longer what they once had been, and those who failed to recognize it would always be at a disadvantage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.